Hello, everyone, and very good afternoon to you, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to Nation Watch. It's Sunday, 15 June 2025. It's an election year. The countdown is on, and the political party that will assume the role of government following September 1 is the APNU, a Partnership for National Unity, as we continue to advocate for and work towards victory at the polls so that oil revenues will reach the table of our citizens in the furtherance of a people-centered development strategy piloted by Aubrey Compton Norton, leader of the political opposition at this time and soon to be president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Today is Father's Day, and I wish on behalf of the leader, executive, and members of the People's National Congress Reform, and by extension, the APNU, best wishes to all fathers and soon to be fathers on this very special day. I also wish to extend special greetings to our mothers among us who have been and are continuing in some instances to play the role of father, given the nature of our very society. Happy Father's Day to everyone who, as my friend Clinton Conway would say, who either by design or accident caused someone to become a mother. Today we'll be discussing this business of floor crossing. But before we get into this floor crossing business, first let me just make the point that in Guyanese political language, crossing of the floor basically refers to a member of parliament who votes against his or her list or party, or stops supporting his or her party and places that support for another. So we've had some of that happening. I There's a lot going on, a lot of fake news and fake publications about persons sort of supporting and openly, well, allegations, false posts about people endorsing this, that, or the other candidate. I noticed fake posts suggesting that Don Hastings Williams, former Minister of Government for the APNU AFC, is supporting another candidate, something she flatly rejected, refuted. There was an insinuation that former opposition leader Joseph Harmon had done the same. He too was denied and rejected and demanded that the post be removed. And we have seen the same done to Ganesh Mahaipal, and he as well likewise rejected the suggestion. There have been all sorts of posters going out there with Amanza Walton Desir, a member of the People's National Congress Reform, alongside a businessman who says he has aspirations of being president. And all of these bits of mischief out there is quite unfortunate. It's not really consistent with what we understand and have been living with in our society here. But I just want to make the point before we get into our conversation. I am wedded to the People's National Congress Reform. My first association with this party was as a child member when I was 8, 9 years old. I held executive office in my children's group. My first public political appearance was in 1985, December, alongside President Desmond Hoyt, as he then was, in the campaign for his re-election. I have been actively involved in national politics as an adult for more than 25 years. And I've held offices in my party at all levels. At the group level, I was chairman. At the regional level, I was chairman. At the national level, I was an elected member of the Central Executive Committee, as I am again. I am only, I believe, the second indigenous Guyanese to be elected to the Central Executive Committee of the People's National Congress Reform, the first being Dr. George Norton, as I recall. If that information is inaccurate, I'm sure I'll be corrected in due course. And I've served at the level of the Regional Democratic Council as well as the Parliament of this country. And I've seen a lot. I believe that every member of the PNCR has a right to their own decisions. I believe that every citizen of this country has a right to join and to support any political party of their choosing. That being said, I do not believe that once elected, you have the right to betray the trust of the people who voted for the list that put you there. And on the internal side of the PNCR, every member has the right to support for election at biennial Congress any person that they choose to support for the position of leader of the party. Once the dust is settled, the elections are concluded at biennial Congress, members have some decisions that they can take. You can continue to support the leader, whether you like the person or not, and continue to do the work for the party. You can choose, if you do not like the leader, if you do not want to embrace the leader because of whatever considerations occupy your mind, your consciousness, you can remain a member of the party and you can become inactive. That's your choice. You can remain a member of the party, respect the leader, and continue to do the work of the party. That too is your choice. I do not believe, however, that you have the right to, at every turn, try to create division within your party, to disrespect the leader of your party, to disrespect your party. This party is close to 70 years old. Members will come, members will go, leaders will come, leaders will go. This party will continue to exist for several decades to come. And we must understand that the element of trust, the quality of respect, are necessary for a strong institution. And a lot of what has been happening is more than a little bit disappointing. More than a little bit disappointing. But we will deal today with this business of crossing the floor. And I want to say that leaving a political party and joining another is nothing new in this country. When the People's Progressive Party was split into the Jaganite and Bornamite factions, as they referred to them back then, eventually emerging out of that was the People's National Congress Reform. A number of persons from the PPP left with Mr. Burnham. And even after that, a number of personalities, a number of key members of the People's Progressive Party joined the People's National Congress Reform. But there was a certain level of discipline, a certain level of decorum, a certain level of respect in the process of transition. Their famous names, Vincent, Bagan, U.C. Koyana, Ranji Chandi Singh, and there are several other names that come to mind when we discuss transitions from the People's Progressive Party to the People's National Congress, as it then was. But coming closer to the topic that we're going to be discussing at the moment, this breakdown in discipline and trust, that's how I'm styling it. Others may disagree with me. Started, in my view, with Manzoor Nadir in 2001. This is my view. Manzoor Nadir, who is now labeled Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly and who presents himself as being unbiased and apolitical, was leader of the united force that contested the elections of 2001 and got a seat in the parliament. Manzoor Nadir accepted ministerial appointment from the People's Progressive Party and took his seat from the opposition side to the government benches with him. The moral and decent thing to do in such a case would have been to accept an appointment as a technocrat, not having been on the PPP's list, and allow another member of the UF to occupy that opposition seat. But Nadir reduced the opposition seats by 1 and increased the PPP's by 1. And this is in the 8th Parliament in 2001. Also in the 8th Parliament, something else happened. In the 8th Parliament, a member of the Working People's Alliance, now deceased, she stopped supporting, this is Miss Sheila Holder, deceased. She stopped supporting the Working People's Alliance, on whose list she became a member of parliament, and joined with Raphael Trotman, who was at the time occupying a seat on behalf of the People's National Congress Reform, and Kemraj Ramjatan, who was a member of parliament for the People's Progressive Party. So you had 3 parliamentarians from 3 different political parties who abandoned their respective political parties, remained members of parliament because there was no recall legislation then, and formed a new political party named the Alliance for Change. Some celebrated the fact that the Alliance for Change was aborted. Some were disappointed at the manner in which this thing happened, because 3 parliamentarians sat on seats earned by their political party, voted for by their supporters, and abandoned their respective parties for the formation of a new one. Those events resulted in a number of things. I believe there was a constitutional amendment. There was a constitutional amendment that treats with the matter. And I believe that amendment could be found at 156.3. 156.3 says a member of the National Assembly shall vacate his seat therein. It goes on a 3 to say, a member of the National Assembly elected on a list shall be disqualified from being a member of the Assembly if he or she, in the prescribed manner, declares that he or she will not support the list from which his or her name was extracted, or declares that he or she abstain from supporting the list, or declares his or her support for another list. And what is interesting is that there were some more developments. In 2018, an attorney at law, and attorneys at law are held by ordinary citizens as very special people with a keen appreciation and understanding of the laws and the constitution of the country. Charandas Persaud in 2018, on one day, supported his government's budget on his feet in the National Assembly of the Parliament, and on the following day, voted with the opposition to bring down his own government. A lot is wrong with that. And then in February of 2025, Gita Chandan-Edmund, a member of parliament for the APNU AFC, from the People's National Congress Reform, supported the People's Progressive Party's budget openly on the floor of the National Assembly. But Gita Chandan-Edmund did not stop there. Recently, in the National Assembly, on her feet, for the record, declared her support for the People's Progressive Party's candidate in the upcoming elections. Gita Chandan-Edmund is an attorney at law, a very special person, respected by the citizenry as a person who has a keen appreciation for and an in-depth understanding of the laws of Guyana and the Constitution. Something seems to be amiss. My guest is Vincent Alexander, long-standing commissioner at the Guyanese Elections Commission, a gentleman who is conversant with all of these issues that I just outlined, and a gentleman who has a keen interest in furthering the advancement of a democratic society in Guyana. Mr. Alexander, welcome again to Nation Watch, and I thank you for joining me and to help our viewers and listeners to better appreciate where we are, how we got here, whether we're in a good place, and where we should be going. Welcome to Nation Watch.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. Thank you very much. And may I take the opportunity before we get into the matter at hand to join with you in extending salutations to all of those fathers out there on Father's Day, and also to all of those fathering mothers, and to admonish all of those non-fathering fathers, because I think we have quite a number of those as well, and they should be admonished on an occasion like this.
As you say, I'll drink to that.
As much as we salute those who are proper fathers and mothers who are fathering their children as well.
Mr. Alexander, walk us through, if you will, the days when there was common decency, when there was respect, when there was honor. In the exercise of a change of mind at the highest level of the political landscape in this country.
To me, all of this has to do with a change on the landscape itself. Historically, our political parties have been operating on the basis of a commonality of ideas about where you want to see the country. In fact, one may well describe politics as a venture intended at capturing state power with the intention of realizing ideas that may be held by a party in relation to the country and the country's development. And so for me, what has occurred and is occurring is that there's been a significant movement away from people being motivated to be involved in politics based on a commitment to ideas, towards people having their personal agendas and seeing politics and political office as a way in which they can pursue those personal agendas. And very often, those personal agendas are material, what they can get out of their involvement in politics. And it's something that's pervasive in our society. So somebody joins the police force and he says, I'm joining the police force because I want to work in traffic, we can give him a box hand. Somebody joins customs and says, I want to work in enforcement, we have access to a clientele. And that also, as I said initially, is what makes the difference today in our politics. People are not wedded together based on a common ideology, a common vision, or a common aspiration. To a very large extent, they join political bodies as they join other bodies in pursuit of personal agendas, which have to do with getting office, status, and material benefits. And if that is what drives someone, then obviously there's no commitment to the body that the person joins. The body is merely a vehicle. And if that vehicle doesn't work for them, then the chances are they will board another vehicle. Now, in the past, indeed, people did change parties, but very often when they changed those parties, there were clear articulations of the ideological reason why they thought they would move from one party to the other. A very, very good example of that is Ranjit Chandy Singh, who was probably the number 2 man in the PPP and probably the ideologue. And he came across to the PNC, and a number of people came with him, and they all came because they thought that the PNC was pursuing the right politics for the country. They thought that they could associate themselves with the ideology of the PNC as much as they wanted to disassociate themselves with the ideology, the dogma, and the doctrinarian politics of the People's Progressive Party. So I think that's the foundation of this. Suffice to say that this has a wider implication in the world, where in the world we've moved away from ideology, so to speak, and the world seemed to be dominated by what we refer to as neoliberalism.
And moneyology.
And that goes with moneyology. But that neoliberalism has a lot to do with people contending that life is simply about personal choices, and not about being wedded to an ideology or being wedded to a group of people who share a common ideology. And so what we are talking about is not only a phenomenon evident in Guyana, but it's a worldwide phenomenon, though the manifestation in Guyana may be far more crass than it is in other places. Because in those other places, even with the neoliberalism kind of predominating to some extent, there's still pockets and still definitions of groups that keep people wedded to their group and to the collective ideals.
Trust. The Guyana electoral system is largely built on trust. People do not vote for a candidate. At all levels, people vote for a list. In the geographic constituency component of the national elections, there is a list for each region that is supplied by every political party that is contesting. So you're not voting for an individual, you're voting for that list of persons. From that list, you are trusting that your political party will extract the most competent, the most committed, the most conscientious worker to represent you in that geographic constituency. When you vote at a national level, you also vote for what is referred to as the national top-up list. It is a list of names from which persons will be extracted to represent that party and the people who voted for it at the level of the parliament, or in the case of government, parliament and the executive government itself. And when the head of that list extracts a person and says to the Guyanese Elections Commission, this is the person that the list is placing in the National Assembly, the representative of that list, the leader of that list, is trusting that this choice, the choice of this person, will redound to the benefit of the list and those who voted for it. Essentially, therefore, Mr. Alexander, in the Guyana context, the only person who gets there, when I say there, by virtue of, and perhaps not even the president, because it is the list that is elected that allows for the president to be named. So not even the president. So nobody who has made it to the next level after the election is there on his or her own strength, but on the votes of a collective that supported a political party of which that person is a member and which supplied that person's name on a list of candidates. Talk to us about the responsibility against that backdrop of a person elected to serve as a member of parliament and some of the obligations and responsibility that come with such a person being extracted to serve at that level.
I want to start off with your last terminology. In your earlier intervention, you talked about the list being the center. In legal terms, yes. But in real politics, people vote for party. Let's get that clear. People really vote in this country for party.
Right. Well,
Very often
the list is a creature of the party.
Yeah, the list is a creature, but the organic relationship is with the party. And very often they don't even know who on the list. I don't think they vote for the party.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is some emphasis on the presidential candidate come leader of the party in that process. And that they vote for a party to a large extent in Guyana without varying is also reflected in when they have problems with the party. And the tendency is simply not to vote. So they don't go to another party. The tendency largely is not to vote as to send a message to their party, so still a relationship with the party. And I think this has been manifest in some of our elections. In particular, I think in the 2006, 2011, in particular elections, where one saw and I think Jack, you admitted this. A large number of PVP followers did not vote on that occasion. He publicly admitted this, and he took some responsibility. He also claimed the party had not dealt with these people properly. So that's the first point I want to make. The people tend to vote for a party. But you have taken, this thing also has to be seen in the context of our political system and the context of our legal system. Historically in Guyana, people were allowed to quote unquote cross the floor.
Mm.
That, however, came to an end. And we have gone as far as to move away from crossing of the floor by putting legislation in place which says that if you got a problem with your party, or your party have a problem with you, you can't just simply go to another party in the parliament. You have to demit office. So our legal framework now provides for that. And so I think we need to be clear in that understanding that our legal framework does not suggest this level of autonomy and independence that you can get up in there and say what you feel like and remain and or go to another party. In both instances, the legal mechanism is there for you to have to admit. If you say what you feel like, the party can say, well, we don't feel like that, and so please leave. And there's the legal mechanism for that. And you yourself could resign. So I think we need to understand that. What we also need to understand is this listing which you talked about. You know, in some regards, given the closeness of the parties on the question of quote unquote socialism, the parties would have adopted, and the People's Progressive Party has maintained its position in terms of democratic centralism. In other words, forget all that gaff you hear about democracy. The People's Progressive Party, by its constitution, is not a committed democratic organization. It is a committed democratic centralist organization, which is quite opposite to democracy.
And sits only in the foundation of numbers and the superiority of numbers.
With a hierarchy where the base is not the decision-making body of people. Those at the top are the decision makers, and the base are the implementers and those who execute what's decided. In some regards, the PNC and its closest to socialism also was kind of akin to that. But we have seen in terms of its constitutional development and its ideological shift that it has become more of a social democratic party than that democratic centralist party. So we now have a difference in some regards in terms of the politics. But in the face of the politics of the parties per se, we have the problem of the individuals who are the members and how they see politics, because with the departure from ideology, with the dominance of the neoliberal approach, the people are neoliberal. And so they see themselves as having this right of choice. I would contend that in the face of that, parties have put mechanisms in place to combat the exercise of that choice. And it always occurs to me that in GCOM, we've had a number of commissioners nominated by the government who have demitted office. Since I'm there, I could tell you about 4 or 5 who demitted office. They have demitted an office which they're not obligated to demit because it's a constitutional office with a lifespan
Indefinite
that's
life.
indefinite life. But still, you see them leaving. And I ask myself,
They're being commanded to leave.
is it that they left of their own volition? And I have come to the conclusion that there is an instrument that is administered when they join with their signature to that instrument, an instrument of resignation, which the party can simply hand in, dated as it seeks to do. Now, I'm quite aware that that kind of practice is not, at least now, and for some time now, evident in the People's National Congress. So that this pervasive disposition of making choices, though pervasive it might be, is not as easily realized in one party as opposed to the other because of practices, and I dare say practices akin to them staying close to the thing called democratic centralism, as opposed to the PNC, which has shifted from that and have become a far more democratic. But that notwithstanding, our political system and our legal system is not altogether grounded on this issue of choices in relation to how you operate in your political party. Because as I said at the inception, people vote for a party, they don't vote for individuals. And that is legally choreographed. That people vote for a party, you said that they vote for a list, the leader of the list pulls. And so one would expect that if you're voting for a party, then there's something you're committed to when you vote for that party. And that has to be the vision, the manifesto, the program, the ideology. And that if you have a problem with that party, the thing to do is to distance yourself from the party rather than to use your accommodation to pull down something which exists as the collective thing and which presumably you joined in keeping with that collective aspiration. And so the manifestation here, obviously, is that people who are leaving these parties, the way in which they leave them, are practicing this neoliberal approach and departing from what our political system and our legal system provides for. And that is most evident in the case of Charandas.
Two quick observations here. One is that it seems to me that the wider Guyanese population, having regard to their exposure to international news and culture that come with social media and mainstream media, television, and all these things that were not available in the early days, seem to have more of an inclination to embrace the American system, and therefore may not have a full grasp of our own domestic set of circumstances, rules, laws, and constitutional provision. What is the second observation is that it's a bit alarming that some persons who benefit from election to the parliament seem also to be somewhat alienated from the local reality and believe perhaps that their embrace of, say, a US approach where you can vote against your own political party and so on, is what they're inclined to follow, as opposed to paying attention to what the local political reality is. How do you
I don't
respond to
fully
that?
agree with you for this reason.
Mhm.
That in most instances in the US system, where people exercise a choice, they articulate it from a ideological and ideational and programmatic perspective. In other words, when a man gets up in Congress, except I think that what's in the American Congress now is an aberration, where a Republican is a Republican, you're not voting for anything else. But generally in the American Congress, when people differ from their party, they differ because they have a value or an idea that runs counter to the party. And on the specific instance, they express a difference. And why I bring that up is because in the case of Guyana, I don't see the people who are differing, so to speak, doing so on principle. The Americans do it on principle. That this is what we believe in, this is their interpretation, this is their understanding. This particular act is not in keeping with what they agree with, it's not in keeping with the people's views who voted for them, and therefore they're distancing themselves. But in Guyana, you don't see that kind of articulation. You see people, by virtue of their behavior, exhibiting that they are even in leaving the party, supporting another party, that they are pursuing personal interests. And that is what makes it different from the situation in America. It's a pursuit of personal interests. However, our political system is not akin or was not designed to facilitate that approach. Our political system, which is not completely Westminster, not completely Whitehall, was more in the direction of the socialist system. As I said, the PPP in terms of its politics is very much still in the communist mode in terms of its politics. And the PNC in terms of its politics is more in the social democratic mode. And none of those two are facilitators. And our constitution and our architecture for elections and all of that do not necessarily facilitate these behavior patterns. You vote for a party, you vote for a list, there's a list leader, and if you join the party based on a belief in some common idea, then both in terms of the structural arrangements and in terms of the organic relationship, it's difficult to see someone simply getting up and going on the other side without declaring clearly that for ideological and other purposes, you're now distancing yourself. And in our system, I repeat, if you so want to distance yourself, the system says, hey, take up your baggage and leave, and then you're free. You're free to join wherever you want to join. What is also of interest is that in the public domain, we don't hear simply of people leaving a party. We hear of people, it's more of joining another one rather than leaving.
Well, that's interesting. Let's talk a bit about Charandas Persaud, an attorney at law. At the time he emerged as a member of parliament for the coalition, a politically unknown personality, becomes a member of parliament. On one day, he supports his government's budget and criticizes the parliamentary opposition. He deals with them condignly for their failures in government and so on. And on the next day, he votes with them with the opposition on a motion of confidence that brought his government down. Personal interest, principle, conscience, what do you make?
If I contextualize it as I've been doing in the neoliberal arrangement, it is not driven by morality. It is driven by interest. And so one has to look to see what, first of all, what Charandas did cannot be justified in the context. I even believe, I am of the view personally that even the judge has not come to terms with the realities of Guyana in the judgment that was given on the no confidence. And that the realities of Guyana is best represented in terms of Caribbean jurisprudence so far by the dissenting vote on the CCJ, where one of the judges says, look, you guys are not contextualizing things in Guyana based on Guyana's constitution and Guyana's political practices. There's a judge who's a dissenting voice. He said, if you read this constitution, it's not the typical Westminster arrangement. And therefore, you have to understand in this constitution that they have a list system. They have somebody who pulls from the list. This is not a constituency system where people go there on their own and garner votes. And so there's no guarantee of a relationship, individual relationship between a parliamentarian and a constituency. It's a relationship between the party that is executed by the individual. And if the individual doesn't want to execute it, he should be somewhere else and should not usurp the thrust that has caused him or her to be in that position to do his or her own thing. There's no legal basis, there is no moral basis for that to happen. So you see a Charandas,
conscience.
you see Charandas saying, he attempts in his articulations to say that his people were affected. And there is where the issue is. There is no his people in this system. Charandas didn't go there and mobilize votes as a constituent candidate, and people voted for him. People didn't even know Charandas would be anything.
I don't think they even knew him.
Right. They voted for a list.
Yeah.
They voted for a party. And the party showed some trust and some faith in Charandas, which he then betrayed. By virtue of what he did, trying to articulate that, well, the sugar workers are his people. Of course, the sugar workers may be his kin.
They were Ravi Dev's people too, and he never got to see.
They may be his kin. But certain political terms, our system did not provide for him to go there and mobilize them. The party mobilized, and he then turned around to use this privilege the party gave to him to bring down the party. So it brings to the question of conscience. Of course, one should operate on conscience. Point one. Point two, my earlier arguments about why people join parties because of vision, because of ideas and all of that, ties into conscience. What the vision is, what you think you should do and you shouldn't do for the country, ties into conscience. So it is not going to be very regular for somebody to depart from the party's position based on conscience, because it is the collective conscience that drives the party, the collective conscience. So it is not easy for somebody to get up and say, but even if that were so, you can't use your conscience in the context where you are the guest of a party to break up the party using common terms. And that's what Charandas did. He's a guest of the party. claims now he doesn't agree with the party. But that don't mean you break up the party. It means you leave the party. What he did was to use his status as a guest, and a guest is a guest, to turn up the tables and upturn everything and break up the whole baby party.
That's the only way he would have been invited to the party, as a guest. But so then comes Gita Chandan-Edmund, another political unknown. Is extracted from the list of the APNUAFC, becomes a member of parliament. In that role, critical of the People's Progressive Party, in some instances silent, but then uses that parliamentary seat to support the budget in the first instance of the People's Progressive Party, while speaking for the people who voted for her party. And her party was in fact in opposition to a number of measures in that budget, and made it quite clear that in its present construct, they could not have supported it. Gita Chandan-Edmund was speaking for the same party, on behalf of the same people who voted for that party, and she supported the budget. As if that was not enough, she used the same parliamentary seat to endorse the candidate for the People's Progressive Party in the upcoming elections. This is an attorney at law, someone who ought reasonably to understand the laws, someone who ought reasonably to be conversant with the basic elements of the Constitution as it relates to her role and function as a member of parliament. Help us understand what is possibly responsible for this kind of behavior.
To have information and to have knowledge is not necessarily akin to your values. So you are arguing the case of the good lady being an attorney at law and therefore knows and knows and knows. Well, it is clear she knew enough to pass the exams. But whether that knowing was translated into a commitment, whether that knowing was translated into a real tool for understanding and administering the affairs of Guyana is another question. So if that is not the case, then what has occurred is what is. What is. And to be a little far-fetched, it speaks to our education system. Because we see more and more in our education system, people are coming out qualified, being able to regurgitate things, but not necessarily understanding, being able to apply, and being able to commit to those things, because you can't commit to what you don't understand. And so one has to see the personalities in our system from that perspective. The issues with the system at large that foster the production and the emergence of that kind of person in the context of the neoliberal arrangements. So they now have their moral ground is choice. The moral ground is choice. But they are coming from a neoliberal arrangement which is in conflict with the way in which our parties and our constitution has evolved. So that there are one of two things that we have to deal with. We either have to deal with the constitution to bring it in line with the practice that is occurring, or we have to use the Constitution to pull people into the place where the Constitution intends that they should be in our legal and political system. And in my humble opinion, there's a clear divide right now in this country between that intention of our legal architecture, intention of our laws, intention of our system, and the actual practices. And that has to do with the fact that even the people who may have put the systems in place were not necessarily committed to the system. Their putting the system in place was an attempt to do what is palatable in terms of international politics. But to do that in pursuit of putting their hands on power and continuing to pursue things the way they see them, as opposed to what they themselves consider to be palatable.
There's a bit of a morality issue here. There's clearly the breach of that trust of which we've been speaking. There's clearly an abandonment of any principle.
It's betrayal. Simple as that.
Yes, there's clear betrayal. But there's a morality issue here too. Because here's what Gita Chandan-Edmund said while she was a member of parliament. She said, and this is on the 16th of June, 2023. I am appalled by allegations of sexual exploitation made against the Minister of Local Government, Nigel Dharamlal. Henceforth, I shall proceed to get further information to complete a thorough legal assessment of the facts on this odious allegation. Upon completion of this examination, I shall proceed to ensure that all the necessary legal actions to ensure that justice is done. The exploitation of our girls is reprehensible, and where this occurs at any level should be a cause for concern. Investigations and legal actions are taken based on the facts that emerge. I hereby encourage all involved in this matter to provide all the facts that can assist us in this endeavor. It is clear we need to do more at the national and community level to protect our girls. This is presumably a conscientious and principled position being articulated here. This is presumably a genuine appeal for the protection of our women and girls. This appeal is coming from a mother, a politician, an attorney at law, a member of parliament. But then this comes up. This comes up. Gita Chandan-Edmund in this photograph is a member of the People's National Congress Reform, is a member of parliament.
A rogue member. Go on.
A member of parliament for the APNU AFC. Out there on the campaign trail with the People's Progressive Party. And there's another image of her appearing similarly next to Nigel Dharamlal, the same person that she criticized. I'm sure we can find that photograph as well. And so this is not merely a situation of a change in ideological perspective on the matter. This goes deeper. This seems to have itself rooted in something different, something, forgive me,
It's rooted in what I said before, self-interest. No.
But would self-interest lead you to abandon
Let me,
values at that level?
Let me address that. First of all, in any society, there's no single moral system. You may have a single legal system where every person is obligated by law to behave in a particular way. But in terms of morality and morals, there is no such singularity. Morals, different groups have different morals, and therefore it's a very heterogeneous kind of arrangement. So the first point I want to make. So please don't let us hold everybody up to the same standards, because they don't all embrace the same morals. What they may be forced to embrace is the same law, but when it comes to morals, the moral may be different. If the foundation of your moral is personal interests, then indeed today you could find yourself relating to one set of people on a particular issue in one way, and tomorrow seem to be quite different because you're not driven by a moral that is cross-cutting. Your moral is interest. And so you could well behave different based on the interest that is manifest at that time. And so it's a kind of a bipolarity.
Well, I get that. I don't get any of the other stuff you're saying. I get that because
that is the consequence.
Yeah,
that is the consequence, the manifestation, the consequence.
This is clearly what it is. I mean, we're going to place on your screens, ladies and gentlemen, this image. I mean, a mother, a daughter, a sister, an attorney at law cannot condemn reasonably, conscientiously, principally a situation as grave as allegations of rape against a person and then embrace the same person for political expedience and
the fact of the matter
help
is
me
that what you are saying is the person expressing his or her view based on an interest at a particular time and in a particular context. That expression of the person's view then is not a totality of the person's disposition. That's what we have to be able to understand. It's not a totality. So where there's bipolarity, you can't take one demonstration and arrive at that this is supposed to be a representation of the totality. And in fact, very often, the totality is a conglomeration, a hodgepodge. There aren't things which are logically integrated and related, because what is driving you is interest. And interest could take you in any direction at any particular point in time. So it is not difficult to understand somebody, you call it taking a principal position, but they take a principal position in relation to a particular matter and interest. I'm a mother, I'm a female, and therefore the interest in that regard allows them to take that position. But when you take the totality, political power, access to material things, and things like that, then that one thing you're referring to could become very minuscule and not a determinant factor in the person's overall behavior pattern. And I'm going back to the point that the determinant factor in the person's behavior pattern is interest. And interest may well be one way, interest may well be manifest, as you have said, on the domestic violence and women brutality matter because of female interests. But interest may be manifest in other ways, in terms of property, in terms of political power. And the totality then is what one has to consider. But a totality which could be difficult to understand because it's kaleidoscopic. Therefore, one has to look at what is the foundation of the person's behavior, and if interest alone is the foundation, then they could be all over the place.
Well, clearly it's interest. I mean, clearly it's interest. But what troubles me as a human being is how can interest direct someone to interact with someone whose values and whose behavior are as reprehensible as to the point where you can't stand them. But then
because of a coincidence of other interests and a coincidence of other values that overshadow the one which you think should be the guiding one.
But like I said, it's obviously interest because clearly what you see up on your screen tells you that this is in fact about interest. But we've had historically people who have been in love with the opposition. I remember Africo Selman loving the opposition so much that she joined it before it became an opposition. So I hope that my friend Gita is not heading down the same path.
An analysis of these situations would lead you to either conclude that the person is driven by values on one hand, consistency of values on one hand, or the person is driven by interest in the other hand, which can point to inconsistency in values.
Now that must instruct the person that there are some decisions to be made. I have interest, I must therefore abandon this one and then move to that one. You cannot be married to a person and get married to somebody else at the same time. You must first end that lawful union before you can embark.
You raise the question of morality again. Morality is not homogeneous.
But no, this is not just morality, this is legal.
It is morality.
No. The law prevents you from getting into another marriage while you're still in one.
So that's the law.
That's the law.
That's the law.
Yeah.
That's the law. These circumstances we are looking at, there are nuances in terms of where the law is. And to a large extent, we have to look at them in terms of our political behavior and political practices. To a large extent, that's where we have to go. The law is one thing. The law is homogeneous. There are people who break the law anyhow, but it's homogeneous. So you can apply the law to everybody in the same way. But when the behavior is being analyzed, one sometimes will have to look beyond the law because it is one's moral system, one's value system that informs how you relate to others, both legally and otherwise. Hence, you have situations where people behave illegally.
Now, after this demonstration, after the conduct of MP Chandan in the National Assembly, after embracing the political opponent of the party that put her in the National Assembly, openly using the seat, as we said, having been criticized publicly, there's now a claim which I cannot verify, that she has resigned. The report I read suggests that she has resigned from all association with the People's National Congress reform. And as she put it, that includes Parliament. Isn't there a lawful way that one resigns from Parliament, that one crafts a letter to the Speaker of the National Assembly and copies that to the leader of one's party, as opposed to a resignation from a party? Are these two not separate, entirely separate functions?
They're separate functions. They're quite separate functions.
And a lawyer should know this, right?
They're quite separate functions. So that if she's just resigning from Parliament, that should be a specific instrument of resignation that is handed in to the Speaker of the National Assembly. Well, you know, you are exhibiting probably
a moderator's
tolerance.
Perspective. A moderator's perspective.
No, the tolerance. the tolerance that is so evident in the People's National Congress. She should have been, without question, removed from Parliament forthwith.
And some say expelled from the party. But let's talk about what this means going forward. There's no recall legislation at the level of the Regional Democratic Council. There was when the local government legislation was being conceived. There was provision in the concept.
I was an
for recall.
advocate in that process for recall.
Yeah.
And I advocated recall from the perspective of the people themselves being able
to vote to remove somebody.
Have a petition and a kind of a referendum to recall councillors, right? The political parties must answer to the question as to why they did not proceed. And it partly speaks to a problem we have with our political culture as well.
I think the PNC still has a tendency to conduct its affairs as gentlemen of England used to centuries ago. A handshake and the acceptance of a person's word. It could be a painful blade to fall on in the Guyanese context at this time. So what we have now is a clear manifestation of, at the level of Region 4, the two top councillors in that RDC were working against their party from the time its leadership changed.
And let's get to the point, go back to the point I made earlier. How the world has changed, how the parties have changed, and how people do not necessarily come to a party based on the commonality of vision and aspiration. They come to a party sometimes based on personal interests. And somebody who comes based on personal interests, when they support the party's position, it is only coincidental.
Well, you know, it's very interesting that the common thread that passes through all of these persons who have acted up recently is the newness to the PNC. I
wouldn't, well, that may be a common thread,
but
it may not be the one you should identify, because they're not the only people new to the PNC, not all of them who knew.
No.
So my question would be, and I would use a term which is not in the dictionary, not the newness, the whiness. The whiness to the PNC, not the newness, because there are a lot of new people who are quite different.
Yeah.
And so one does not find a common denominator among all the new people, but you can find a common denominator among them that does not extend to other people because they're in a particular category by themselves, which I call the whiness.
Which is really what I was getting to, because apart from their newness is the fact that they emerged at the same time.
Let me stick a pin in the newness part. You know why I can stick a pin on that? Because I got some old ones who have behaved the same way. And that has nothing to do with newness. It has to do with whiness.
I'm still trying to get that common thread.
The whiness.
Right. So
it may be an abstract term I'm using.
Yeah, but I get you.
The whiness.
I get you. It presents for a political leader a major challenge, because the mass of the membership, and in our case, I think that exceeds 23,000 people, could say to the leader that they don't trust this, that, or the other new person that comes in. And that puts a political leader under pressure to say to the mass base of its membership, his membership, look, this person is not a Gita Chandan. This person is not a Charandas. This person is not a Daniel C. Ram. You know?
The question there is that when you have new people, there must be some process of real integration and therefore a manifestation of their real commitment, as opposed to them coming in, occupying office and being able to pursue their own agenda. So that how your party is organized.
You qualify the whiteness.
Right? Yes. So for example, I would contend in the PPP, the iron hand there and all the instruments they use to control people doesn't allow you, new or old, to go your own way. They have some mechanisms, harsh mechanisms, strict mechanisms. It would occur that the PNC is a little more liberal.
But there was one that escaped the iron hand. It was when Donald Ramotar came out and said that this PPP under Jagdeo has become an anti-working class political party, departing from the fundamental basis of its initial existence, its creation by Dr. Jagan. After that, I heard absolutely nothing from Donald Ramotar. So it slipped out, but apparently it was recalled.
Well, I have said to you that we have had changes in the party. But Donald Ramotar could say what he wishes to say. He is so far from the seat of power.
As are all Jaganites in the PPP, completely removed from the seat of power.
Not only are they removed from the seat of power, but that which drove them, because they were driven by something to be PPP, that which drove them is not the same. The extent to which they have retained democratic centralism, that might be the same, but that's only an element. There are other elements. How do you see economics? How do you see people's development? Those elements are all collectively that drove them, the totality of what drove them. One of the things is still there, and the one is the one that really, that's a mechanism for control in relation to everything else. But the everything else is not necessarily the same. Hence, they have departed, or the party has departed from them.
I'm going to take a chance here and stay on the morality side. I hope I don't lose you for it. All of these people, from James Bond to C. Ram to Chandan, whoever, all of them have been vocally critical of corruption in the People's Progressive Party, about the politicizing of the police force, about the victimizing of African Guyanese and the discrimination, political and ethnic discrimination that seemed to have been a tool used by the People's Progressive Party for some time. All of them have been critical. All of them have bashed the People's Progressive Party for corruption and nepotism and high cost of living and oppression of the working poor and discrimination against young Black people and all of this. And now these people, some of them who've never really walked in the sun for the People's National Congress reform and talked to anyone in the streets or hand out a flyer to anyone, are now visibly active in the field for the PPP, which speaks of the iron hand of control that says if you don't do them and you don't go out there and be publicly visible, you don't have nothing to get. But here in the PNC, they were sheltered in large measure by the majority of hardworking members of this party.
Let's put it this way. If I see an instrument that I want to make use of, and its people have to find a way to associate with those people. And if those people are expressing certain ideas and so, I have to get into that body of people. I have to identify with what they're saying. And so my articulations and so forth can be congruent with what those people are saying. We have to judge people not on their articulations. We have to judge them on their behavior. And therefore, one has to look not as what these people have said, that there's corruption and all of that. One has to look at what they have done, even as they said what they were saying. And so probably there should be a check now for the purposes of learning, getting a lesson from what has occurred, to see where they actually were behaviorally, as opposed to where they were orally. And one may well find that nothing has really changed. All that has changed is that they are now in a place where they are more, it is more...
Where in the mind they were before.
No, well, probably where they were in the mind before, but in a place where they can achieve what they wanted to achieve anyhow.
Mr. Alexander, as we wind down, as we wrap up, there's something that really troubles me in all this. This breach of trust, this betrayal that we've seen. I mean, many people dismiss it and say, quite factually, quite honestly, that these people who have gone take nothing with them and can give nothing to where they go. That's a fact. But here's what troubles me. I come from an indigenous heritage where we believe until now that a person's word, a person's commitment is a representation of that person's honor. If you, for example, go to an indigenous village and you make a commitment, let's say for conversation purposes, there's a child and you profess to like this child and you promise that you're going to send a particular toy or say a bicycle for this child. But you do not remember. If you go back there 6, 7, 8 years later, you will be reminded that you had committed to sending a bicycle for this child and you didn't. And quite possibly you will be told that you're not welcome there on account of your broken promise. Now, these people, having done what they did, have given a sort of an image to the People's National Congress reform. And when this party goes out there to speak to the indigenous community, I am telling you that the first order of business will be to explain the behavior of some of its senior members who have done the kind of injustice to an organization that they have done. And it could very well put the People's National Congress reform in a bad light among indigenous peoples if, as a party, the PNCR does not manage very well how it interacts with the indigenous community on the question of trust.
I hear what you said. What you said, well, I would take it from a social science perspective to be what is the dominant value system among the indigenous peoples, because I don't think that man for man, you may be able to prove that, but dominant, so it's identified with the collective. But I want to put it in the wider context of Guyana. I have grown up in Guyana, where for all intents and purposes, politics has been defined as the art of manipulation. Whether we like it or not, we seem to have inherited the definition of politics, that this thing is the art of manipulation. Years ago, doing a commentary, decades ago, doing a commentary, I introduced the term politricks. I introduced the term politricks in a commentary. I can probably find the script. Years ago, I think I was in my early 30s or late 20s. And it was intriguing a few days ago
Ali Cock.
when the former vice president, who happens to be Amerindian, clearly said, I'm entering the politics.
Yes. Transition from politics to politics. Again, a question of interest.
And what I'm saying, that the concept of politics in Guyana, whether subconsciously or otherwise, is largely that it is the art of manipulation. So when somebody tell you Jagdeo is a good politician, and they say that, what are they speaking to? They're not speaking about his goodness. They're speaking about his deviousness, his manipulation of people, his control of people, and things like that. And that is how we see politics in this country.
But I must tell you that in the case of Sidney Ali Cock, he has signaled to us and signaled to the leader in my presence that he is retired from politics. And he has made it clear that he has withdrawn from being the leader of his political party. And that leadership is now vested in another member, Vincent Henry, who is a member of the coalition's parliamentary team. So that whatever Sidney Ali Cock says or does, it is entirely outside of the political party structure.
He attempted to say that in his public presentation. He says this is personal.
Yes.
He doesn't want anybody to believe that he is imposing upon them.
Yeah.
But he admitted at the same time the nature of the politics, that is politics.
Yeah.
And in that regard, we have shallow memories. It's not very many months ago that James Bond said he was taking a sabbatical from politics.
Yes.
A sabbatical which would last around 2 years.
Yes.
Apparently,
2 years are up.
There's been an abortion.
Yes.
Now the 2 years not up. Factually, the 2 years not up. There's been an abortion of the sabbatical.
I don't think the same applies to Sidney Ali Cock, because I know the gentleman.
No, I'm not saying it
fairly
applies to
well.
Sidney Ali Cock. I'm not saying it applies to Sidney Ali Cock. The similarities that Sidney say are out of politics.
Yeah.
The other thing is that Bond is saying out of politics.
Well, if you know that particular gentleman,
Right?
you will have a bag of salt and a spoon in hand for every sentence he utters. As the old people say, take it with a pinch of salt. I say just.
I don't have a bag of salt
I say just
because
a
he's exhausted my bag of salt.
Well, Mr. Alexander, where in closing do we go from here as a nation? Where do we go from here in terms of our politics and our representation and the integrity of what we present to the people as a political party in the form of representatives?
We have to have in this country a leadership, political leadership, and civil society leadership who start to occupy the high moral ground. It might sound contradictory because I said morals are not not homogeneous, but they are morals which are associated with reasonable people, some of which are associated with the various scriptures, be the Bible and the Quran and the Bhagavad Gita and so. And I think that what has to occur in the first instance, we have to start to ascertain ourselves from a moral perspective so that, one, we can influence the incoming generations from that perspective, and two, we can hold others their feet to the fire, because very often, as has happened, even in these instances, they tend to say the right things, even as they do the wrong things. But if people are saying the right things and you stay in the case, they tend to do the right things, not because that's what they want to do, but because they want acceptance. And so that's a way in which you have to hold them accountable for what they say, even though they pursue something different. They can end up doing what they're not inclined to do because in their interest, they want to be seen a particular way. And you are demonstrating that you're not relying on the definition of these people by what they say, but by what they do. And so you can checkmate them.
And your final words on the question of recall legislation at all levels of government and the application of recall.
I would not have a final word on recall of legislation, so to speak, because my whole view of the political
Well, your
system,
final word on this program.
my whole view of the political system is so different in terms of the need for constituencies as a majority element of our electoral system, the need for top up only for the purposes of ensuring you have proportionality and all of that. And so I'm inclined towards less centralization. I'm inclined towards the real persons being there rather than images that are intended to capture the people's attention.
I get you loud and clear, and I'm sure that our viewers have also wrapped their heads around, tightly around what your last words on this subject. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for today on Nation Watch. Mr. Alexander, I'd like to thank you very much, as always, for coming on board and for sharing your words of wisdom and offering clarity to all of these issues that affect us as a nation. Until we meet again, remember, if Guyana is to grow, the PPP must go. Until we meet again, God bless.